They were constructed before the majority of today's soldiers were even born, and they are worn out and dilapidated. In its conflict with Russia, Ukraine is utilizing these garbage weaponry, Cold War relics, American cast-offs, and military relics from the Reagan era. However, Russia's modern army is being destroyed by this so-called garbage. How could that be? How are these antiquated weapons aiding Ukraine in its conflict and degrading one of the world's most powerful military forces? Let's examine why America is embarrassing Russia and Ukraine by giving over what appears to be scrap. First, the equipment that is referred to as junk is military excess that the United States no longer need. Too old to sell but too costly to properly destroy, some of it has been kept in storage for decades. The work, transportation, and disposal of hazardous materials required to scrap a single armored vehicle can total tens of thousands of dollars. Some of it was utilized in the Gulf, Iraq, Afghanistan, or Vietnam. Was the Pentagon, the first to roll out of America's neglected war chest, recognized the chance to save millions and recycled it by sending it to Ukraine in the fight against Russia? One of the United States' oldest and most combat-tested armored vehicles. Some have referred to the M113 as a combat bus. It was originally used by US forces in Vietnam after being introduced in 1960. It has since been used in almost all of the United States' major conflicts, such as the Gulf War, Iraq, and Afghanistan. It appears to be a shoebox made of steel, flat, boxy, and devoid of frills. However, the purpose of this armored personnel carrier was to deploy men while being fired at and still live. Before the conflict in Ukraine started, the US had more than 6,000 of these in stockpiles gathering dust. They were given a second chance at life. After repainting and transferring them by train and sea, the US turned over about 900 to the Ukrainian forces. Why employ the M113 though? Because it's inexpensive, easy, and tough. It doesn't require sophisticated electronics or digital dashboards. If necessary, Ukrainian mechanics can repair it using a welding torch, a tool, and spare parts taken from abandoned tractors. These junk boxes are also used to deploy anti-tank squads, evacuate the wounded, and rush men under armor onto Russian lines during combat. Russian special soldiers are losing ground against Ukrainian infantry rolling in vehicles from the Vietnam War. While the M106 mortar carrier is transferring weaponry, the M103 may be hauling personnel. The M106, which is based on the same chassis, has a large 107mm mortar system that can rain high explosive rounds from behind cover in exchange for infantry seats. Once mothballed by the US, this Cold War veteran is now making a comeback and delivering a powerful blow to Ukraine. A special version of the M113 was designed to bring a 4.2-inch 107mm mortar into combat. The M106, which was created in the 1960s, was intended to follow infantry troops and provide quick, covert, indirect fire support. Many M106s were stored or given to allies after the US retired the majority of them in the late 1980s. Many have arrived in Ukraine thanks to funding from other sources. Ukrainian personnel swiftly adjusted once they were there. They deployed mobile mortar units that can move quickly, fire quickly, and disappear before Russia can react. It demonstrates that even a Cold War era tracked mortar transporter can still be effective and is another instance of how a low-tech, high-impact platform from decades ago has found fresh life on the front lines. Transportation is only one aspect of the utilization of garbage. Even antiquated weapons like as the M109 howitzer, popularly referred to as the Paladin, are being deployed in the conflict with Russia. This goes beyond simple fire support. Resurrected to fight a modern conflict, it is a cold conflict cannon on rails. This howitzer suppresses Russian artillery and clears the path in addition to supporting soldiers. Before a single Ukrainian boot touches down, it erupts into quiet in the trenches. This Cold War era 155mm self-propelled howitzer, which was first deployed in 1963, is still in use in the United States today. As part of military aid packages, the United States provided over a dozen, mainly older A5 models to Ukraine. With a shell weighing more than 100 pounds, these monsters can fire 6 rounds each minute. That is sufficient to blow trenches, demolish Russian bunkers, and halt armored advances. However, the M109's mobility, rather than just its firepower, is what really makes it strong. Before the Russians can triangulate their position, Ukrainian crews can shoot, relocate, and reload. In order to escape Russia's lethal Lancet drones and counter battery fire, shoot and scoot strategies have become crucial, old rubbish outperforming new technology once more. Like the M101 howitzer, it is small and outdated, but its power should not be understated. The standard light field gun was invented before the Cold War in 1941 during World War II, and this towed artillery piece was first used during that conflict. As a backup weapon, it saw combat in Vietnam's jungles, on the beaches of Normandy, and even decades later in Iraq and Afghanistan. Hundreds were either handed to allies or kept in storage when the United States removed it from frontline service in the early 1980s. America and its allies opened the vaults when Ukraine ran out of artillery. M101s were sent by a number of countries, notably the US and Lithuania, to support Ukraine's firepower. Despite not having digital fire controls or automation, these howitzers are dependable, strong, and simple to maintain. They have been used to shell Russian trench systems, soft-skinned vehicles, and reinforced positions by Ukrainian personnel who are frequently trained in a few days. They make up for their lack of technology with accessibility and ease of use. And when outdated artillery shells are modified with the M734 multi-option fuse, a Cold War-era part that transforms ordinary rounds into precision killers, that effect becomes even more lethal. Although it may seem like a small part, the M734 fuse is revolutionary. This multi-option artillery fuse, which was designed in the 1980s, can be set to explode at impact in an airburst just above the target after a brief wait or in proximity. Because of its versatility, it is useful in contemporary artillery operations, particularly where precision is crucial. Its incorporation into Ukraine's arsenal of artillery highlights a deliberate focus on optimizing the impact of each fired round. The United States has provided Ukraine with a significant amount of artillery ammunition as of November 2024 to aid in its defense against the Russian onslaught. The US has supplied more than 3,155,000 artillery rounds, more than 105,000 rounds, and almost 152,000 rounds according to data released by the US Department of Defense. Although the precise quantity of M734 multi-option fuses that Ukraine received has not been made public, the sheer amount of artillery rounds indicates that a sizable percentage might be fitted with cutting-edge fuses such as the M734 to increase their potency. These vintage American war machines, Cold War mortars, armored carriers, and howitzers are demonstrating that steel, shrewd strategy, and simplicity are still effective in combat. Ukraine is retaliating forcefully, not merely getting by with this so-called garbage. Additionally, another layer of forgotten US firepower is clearing the skies above as these ground systems bombard Russian locations from below. The Hawk system. Imagine attempting to use technology from the 1960s to intercept a military drone or cruise missile. Sounds crazy, doesn't it? But using the US-made Hawk system, Ukraine has done just that. Homing All-the-Way Killer, or Hawk for short, is a powerful air defense system from the Cold War. The United States' first transportable medium-range surface-to-air missile system, the Hawk was created by Raytheon in the 1950s and was intended to intercept aerial threats at low to medium altitudes, especially Soviet bombers and attack planes. After formally joining the US military in 1959, it soon established itself as a vital component of NATO's integrated air defense system spanning Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. The United States had more than 40 Hawk battalions at its height, each with many launchers and radars. More than 30 allied countries added Hawk batteries to their defense arsenals, demonstrating the system's widespread exportation. Notably, Israel used Hawk missiles successfully and won multiple aerial battles during the Yom Kippur War in 1973. Beginning with the improved Hawk, often known as a Hawk, in the 1970s, the Hawk system experienced multiple upgrades over the course of its existence. Its engagement range was increased to about 25 miles by later improvements made during the 1980s and 1990s under Hawk Phase, Inos A2 and 3rd. These improvements included enhanced missile guidance, electronic countermeasures, and more sophisticated radar systems. Despite these improvements, the Hawk was progressively supplanted as the main medium to long-range air defense system by the longer-range Patriot missile system, which entered service in 1985. Refurbished Hawk units have been provided to Ukraine to strengthen its air defense capabilities throughout the continuing conflict, demonstrating the system's lasting value. The Ukrainian Air Force's 14th Anti-Aircraft Missile Regiment, based in Poltava Oblast, has reportedly used Hawk systems to successfully intercept aerial threats. This unit demonstrated the Hawk's ongoing significance on the contemporary battlefield by successfully shooting down approximately 40 Shahed 136 drones and 14 cruise missiles as of December 2023. Ukraine is doing more than just bringing back Cold War-era missiles. The Zuni rocket is an example of how hardware is becoming inventive, even in museums that have forgotten it. Created in the United States, designed for use by carrier-based aircraft like as the F-8 Crusader and A-4 Skyhawk, the Zuni is a 127mm air-to-ground rocket that was first used by the French Air Force and Armed Forces in the 1950s. It was utilized against ground targets, including as troop concentrations and bunkers during intense warfare in Vietnam. Despite being unguided, each rocket is incredibly powerful and can carry incendiary, anti-tank, or high-explosive warheads. The Zuni was regarded as state-of-the-art at the time, but after decades of usage, it was rendered obsolete by more advanced guided missiles. By the 1990s, the majority had been removed from US frontline duty, leaving tens of thousands in storage as surplus, too old to sell and too important to completely trash. 6,000 more rockets were shipped to Ukraine by the United States. States. The way the Zuni rocket is being deployed in Ukraine is just as important as its destructive capability. Ukraine has no aircraft that could use the device, which was initially intended to be launched from fighter jets. Unfazed, Ukrainian experts came up with innovative solutions. To fire the Zuni like a ground-based artillery weapon, they modified Soviet-era ground vehicles such as BM-21 Grad rocket trucks. These decades-old rockets, mounted on modified launch rails or makeshift pods, are now being fired in volleys, and their high explosive warheads are saturating enemy positions. They are being used by Ukrainian forces to attack Russian trench lines, infantry concentrations, and soft-skinned vehicles, particularly in regions where conventional artillery is scarce or requires immediate assistance. They can be shot in great quantities, repositioned with ease, and launched rapidly due to their very small size. Furthermore, they are not only effective but also disposable due to their donation from enormous US surplus stocks. It's another instance of Ukraine using abandoned American equipment as a force multiplier on the battlefield. However, not all of the weapons in this armory of junkyard weapons are low-tech. Some are simply old technology picking up new skills. Texas Instruments and then Raytheon developed the AGM-88 HARM, or high-speed anti-radiation missile, in the early 1980s. It locks onto radio frequency emissions and smacks into opponent radar systems before they can even fire, destroying them. Upgraded models can travel up to 93 miles, whereas early models had a range of about 30 miles. How did they manage to launch the missile, since Ukraine lacks the F-16 and EA-6B Prowler, two American aircraft that were used to launch it? With the help of NATO, Ukrainian engineers were able to convert Soviet-era MiG-29s and Su-27s to shoot Western AGM-88s, combining incompatible technology into a deadly battlefield solution. Cold War airplanes were converted into radar hunting platforms through the use of modified pylons, modified targeting systems, and innovative programming. And the outcomes? Tragic. These missiles have been employed by Ukrainian troops to destroy scores of Russian air defense installations such as S-300 and Buk radar systems, making it more difficult for Russia to conduct safe operations in disputed airspace. At least 30 radar and missile system kills directly linked to damage strikes were verified by open source intelligence by the end of 2023. Many of these deaths allowed Ukrainian drones and attack aircraft to safely conduct follow-up missions. Since August 2022, the United States has provided Ukraine with a considerable quantity of AGM-88 damage missiles in a variety of military aid packages. The 19th US, the missile was initially formally included in the presidential drawdown package. Sources confirmed that hundreds have been supplied from pre-modernization stockpiles, providing Ukraine with a steady supply of weaponry capable of eliminating radars, though exact numbers have not been made public. Each missile delivers precise destruction with its 66-kilogram high-explosive warhead. These Cold War missiles have proven incredibly successful even without the most recent enhancements, forcing Russian radar technicians to either remain dark or perish while attempting to illuminate the sky. Russian forces are being blinded by a weapon that was created to destroy Soviet air defense on the very battlefields it was intended to combat. Though not all of the US weapons shipped to Ukraine are antique museum pieces, it is evident that this rubbish is making a substantial contribution to Ukraine's war. American soldiers continue to utilize some of them today. Others were cutting edge in their day, but have since been pushed aside in favor of more recent technology, but that doesn't mean they've lost their edge. Consider the Javelin. It is a contemporary marvel, a shoulder-fired, fire-and-forget anti-tank missile. It was first introduced in the mid-1990s and locks onto a target using infrared imaging, enabling the operator to rapidly seek cover after launch. Because it strikes directly on top of the turret, where armor is weakest, its top assault profile makes it particularly deadly against tanks. The US didn't simply send its newest batches over when the conflict in Ukraine started. The initial versions, the original Javelins that had been stored in warehouses for years, were disposed of. By Pentagon standards, these missiles were getting close to being obsolete. On the battlefields of Ukraine, however, the situation was nothing short of revolutionary. According to estimates, the Javelin's kill rate against Russian armor in the early stages of the conflict was 90%. Thousands were sent. According to a research by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, the unmistakable arc of a Javelin attack was soon feared by Russian tank personnel. The Stinger missile comes next. The FM-92 Stinger, a classic Cold War design, went into service in the 1980s and assisted Mujahideen forces in taking down dozens of Soviet helicopters during the Soviet-Afghan War. It is a manned portable air defense system that uses infrared homing to eliminate low-flying aircraft. Ukraine needed the Stinger to counter Russian Ka-52 assault helicopters or land drones and low-altitude fixed-wing aircraft, even though it was outdated technology by today's US standards. Stingers were being used by Ukrainian troops to make Russian planes fly higher and less efficiently within weeks of Russia's full-scale invasion. The United States supplied 800 Stinger systems and more than 2,000 Javelins to Ukraine by the middle of 2023, and suddenly a Reagan-era weapon was changing the course of the conflict once more. In both situations, the US could have sent the excess old stock, the stored warheads, and the legacy systems instead of building new missiles. And the US isn't the only country doing this. Nations are transporting surplus commodities to the east from NATO and beyond. The battle for Ukraine has grown into a coalition of junkies and a worldwide endeavor that is having a more severe impact on Russia than anyone anticipated. The Leopard 2A4 main combat tanks, which were constructed in the 1980s and are long retired from frontline Spanish duty, were transferred to Ukraine by Spain. Even though these are older and less sophisticated than the A6 or A7 types, they are nonetheless fully equipped to combat Russian T-72s and T-80s and have heavy armor and weapons. 10 Leopard 2A4s were originally promised by Spain, and more are being restored for delivery in the future. After some initial hesitancy, Germany dispatched its Gepard anti-aircraft tanks, which were Cold War-era equipment that hadn't fired in years. The Gepard's radar systems and twin 35mm autocannons are excellent at taking down low-flying aircraft, drones, and helicopters. Gepards have emerged as one of Ukraine's most reliable instruments for eliminating Shahed drones since their deployment. Germany deployed 46 Gepards and more over 60,000 rounds of ammunition as of the end of 2023. Stormer HVMs, high-velocity missile launchers installed on tracked vehicles, were supplied by the United Kingdom. These systems were created in the 1990s to defend ground forces against air threats. They launch Starstreak anti-aircraft missiles at speeds greater than Mach 4. Even though the Stormer's platform is outdated by today's standards, it is nonetheless quite successful at preventing Russia from controlling the low skies. Australia even participated by supplying 120 Bushmaster protected mobility vehicles, which are tough, wheeled armored trucks designed for Iraq and Afghanistan in the early 1990s. These vehicles were modified for Ukraine's requirements from Australia's reserve fleet, however they are not quite vintage. France's supply of 30 AMX-10RC armored reconnaissance vehicles, which were first used in the late 1970s, is another example of firepower that has been forgotten but is now being revived. Additionally, the Netherlands sent YPR-765 infantry combat vehicles, a Dutch modified variant of the US M113, while Belgium supplied M113 armored personnel carriers and Minimi machine guns that were taken directly from reserve stocks. T-72 tanks, which were formerly a member of the Warsaw Pact, were sent by Poland and the Czech Republic to halt Russian advances, drawing on their post-Soviet arsenals. Every piece of hardware has a unique story to tell. Reactivated, repurposed, and reintroduced into combat, old systems proved their worth on Europe's most difficult front lines. And Russia is definitely feeling the heat, because Moscow is more afraid of something than firepower for every antiquated tank or dusty launcher: Ukrainian determination. Ukrainian soldiers have often demonstrated that museum-quality equipment can be transformed into frontline weapons with bravery, tactical ingenuity, and perseverance. They are demonstrating that how the equipment is utilized, not its age, is what counts. What others threw away has become a lifeline. Perhaps America set the example. This rubbish is worth $31.7 billion according to the US Department of State, but it's now a worldwide endeavor. To keep Ukraine in the fight, allied countries from Spain to Australia have joined the effort, delving deeply into long-retired reserves, military museums, and storage yards. Why, therefore, is this tactic effective? Because possessing the newest toys isn't necessarily the goal of battle. It concerns volume, logistics, and the timely delivery of viable weaponry to the battlefield. Old military equipment worth billions of dollars is sitting inert in the United States. By recycling it, the United States and its allies are transforming it into combat power and supplying Ukraine with tried and true, straightforward, and durable equipment. Ukraine can seize ground, hold ground, and cause damage with equipment that may be too old for American forces. Russia is also alarmed by this, since it eliminates the necessity for the West to destroy the Russian war machine with F-35s or M1A2 Abrams. However, what if this is just the start? What if Ukraine's success with antiquated military equipment is the beginning of a whole new military philosophy rather than an anomaly? A philosophy that prioritizes quickness, creativity, and resourcefulness over precision-guided intricacy. The way Ukraine has grabbed what other countries put on hold and made it a lifeline is forcing militaries all across the world to reconsider their strategies. In a time of tight budgets, quick technology advancements, and unforeseen disputes, employing junk may no longer be a last resort but rather a calculated move. Rather than spending billions on cutting-edge technology that takes years to deploy, countries may shift their focus to redundant, modular, and proven solutions. Ukraine has demonstrated that access, not perfection, is what matters most. Top-tier tanks are useless if they are stored in a depot or take months to arrive, whereas outdated equipment is transported from ships to the battlefield in a matter of days. Not everyone is ignoring this change. NATO military strategists are keenly examining Ukraine's strategies. European defense ministries are having serious conversations about using vehicles from from the Vietnam War and artillery from the Cold War to thwart a current invasion. They are reconsidering whether it makes sense to stockpile or scrap legacy systems. Additionally, Pentagon officials in Washington are investigating ways to expedite the surplus donation process, moving outdated but still functional systems to the front lines of pressing wars. Even non-NATO nations are taking notice. For instance, Taiwan is examining how Ukraine has compensated for being outnumbered and maybe outgunned by using outdated equipment. Taiwan may also need to rely on strong, reasonably priced, mobile fortifications that can withstand initial strikes and sustain resistance in the event of a future Chinese invasion, rather than the newest stealth fighters. A two-tiered military economy could result from this strategic reassessment. Instead of pristine and costly systems, nations may start manufacturing high-intensity junk, purpose-built systems made to be affordable, efficient, and easily maintained. Simpler weapon systems may become more popular again, with designs that prioritize adaptability and durability over digital integration. Think AK-47s instead of guns with laser guides. Prioritize M113s above next-generation IFVs. Furthermore, this isn't limited to hardware. It pertains to thinking, logistics, and doctrine. The Ukrainians have demonstrated that with the right encouragement and assistance, a well-trained conscript with a 40-year-old launcher can repel elite forces. The way small units function has been drastically changed by their tactical employment of drones, which are typically off-the-shelf commercial models modified with improvised munitions. The distinction between an engineer and a soldier, as well as between a workshop and a battlefield, has become hazy. Ukrainian field improvisations are currently being studied by US military institutions. Examples include how Ukrainian army employ handheld radio jammers in conjunction with simple drone maneuvers to impersonate Russian positions, or how GoPro cameras put on helmets are used to webcast attacks for real-time analysis. These are combat tricks, not textbook strategies. They're also at work. This acceptance of junk is a caution though. It draws attention to the vulnerability of high-tech systems. The cost curve is broken when a $300 drone you built can destroy a $10 million tank. The technological advantage becomes a problem when modern air defense radars are blinded by missiles that are decades old. In this way, the conflict in Ukraine represents a test of long-held military presumptions by superpowers rather than just a geopolitical conflict. Despite investing heavily in modern weapons, Russia has been humiliated on numerous occasions by groups that use refurbished equipment. The message is clear: quantity and adaptability frequently outperform state-of-the-art quality, particularly in lengthy confrontations. Examples include seized T-72s that have been turned against their former owners and ammo stores that have been revived for use on the front lines. In the meantime, there are difficult challenges facing the industrial military complex, particularly in the West. Is it able to keep up with the speed of combat? Can it create quickly, cheaply, and in large quantities? If the answer is no, then it makes sense to put more effort into recycling old war machines, modular improvements, and excess reactivation. A new era of military sustainability may be modeled after Ukraine's experience. This strategy has its detractors. Some contend that depending on antiquated systems is risky by nature and exposes soldiers to needless danger. Some are concerned that it creates a precedent for second-tier warfare in which more developed countries transfer their debts to less developed allies. However, Ukraine's success shows that even outdated technology may have a significant impact if it is handled properly. The market for reconditioned weapons is probably going to expand as other countries rush to resupply and rearmament. Defense contractors may decide to devote some of their attention to renovating the current generation rather than creating the next. This has the potential to democratize military power, granting smaller countries access to weaponry that was previously thought to be unattainable. Additionally, it might develop a secondary arms economy based on what is still effective rather than what is novel. The psychological effect comes next. It sends a strong message each time Ukrainian troops destroy Russian armor using weaponry from the 1970s. It's a David and Goliath situation for the planet. It is an embarrassment to Russia, and the fact that the billions spent decades ago are still valuable today is a vindication for America. This changes the way surplus equipment is viewed and defense investments are evaluated. Perhaps the most important lesson learned is that advanced electronics and defense contracts don't inherently build resilience. The ability to turn constraints into leverage is innate in people, flexibility, and inventiveness. Ukraine's use of junk is a prime example of military tenacity and evidence that motivation and creativity are just as important as, if not more so than, gear. Another deeper philosophical question raised by Ukraine's example is whether we are preparing for the battles we wish to fight or the ones that will really occur. Large-scale, technologically sophisticated engagements, stealth bombers, integrated battle networks, and fifth-generation fighters have been a focal point of Western military planning for decades. However, in practice, contemporary battle frequently resembles a concoction of cyber disruption, insurgency, and trench warfare. In these kinds of settings, This is especially important for nations without substantial defense budgets that are currently confronting existential threats. Consider countries in Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, or even sections of Africa and Latin America where resources are scarce, yet the threat is genuine. For them, Ukraine serves as a survival blueprint as well as an example of resistance. The Ukrainians have demonstrated that even the most limited arsenals can be made more powerful via strategic alliances, civic engagement, and national mobilization. Volunteers receive training in repairing outdated weapons, using 3D printers to create drone parts, and converting ordinary trucks into mobile command centers. Families give supplies to battalions on the front lines. Private businesses raise money for tactical equipment. Ukraine has been able to transform near obsolescence into a type of asymmetric strength thanks to this combination of strategy and society. Furthermore, the concept of citizen defense, the conviction that common people can repel even the most heinous acts of aggression if they are prepared and organized, has been revived by this war. It invokes the spirit of the Korean partisans or the resistance fighters of World War II, communities that took up whatever weapons were available and held their stand instead of waiting for international help. There is no romanticism here. It's grounded in reality. Additionally, it's changing how the world perceives the distribution of power, from analog mortars to decades-old drone killers, from Cold War artillery to APCs from Vietnam. Ukraine is demonstrating that you can defeat a superpower with enough resolve, creativity, and so-called junk. However, what are your thoughts? Can Ukraine's struggle for survival find an unexpected hero in America's surplus, or is it a less expensive method of getting rid of outdated junk? Please share your thoughts in the comments section and remember to subscribe to my